Welcome to Eye on America. I'm Michelle Miller. Today we explore how communities are coordinating to keep each other safe and healthy. In Maryland, we look at preventative measures to keep both humans and wildlife safe during flight. And in New Jersey, we see how first responders are helping opioid users seek life-saving treatment. But first, our nation's all-volunteer military is facing a surprising recruiting challenge. Only 1 in 4 young Americans meets the mental and physical requirements for service. David Martin heads to the Pentagon to learn why many are calling for revisions to keep up with the modern reality of defense.
Not everybody gets to meet the boss their first day on the job.
Raise your right hand and repeat after me.
But these brand new members of the armed forces got to meet Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin as he marked a major milestone.
But 50 years ago this week, the United States stopped drafting citizens into service and turned instead to an all-volunteer force.
It was created at the end of the Vietnam War to replace the widely unpopular draft. But former Secretary of Defense Mark Esper says the all-volunteer force is showing its age.
The all-volunteer force is on a long, slow decline due to a number of demographic and cultural trends that need to be arrested, or else we will find ourselves in a tough situation years down the road.
According to Pentagon statistics, only 1 in 4 young Americans meets the mental and physical requirements to join.
Lower your heels down to the ground.
Making it increasingly difficult for the military to find enough volunteers to fill the ranks.
Ready, stretch!
The Army has started a prep camp for those who want to join but can't meet the standards. But Corey Shockey of the American Enterprise Institute says there needs to be a more basic change.
The standards that we set for admission to the military have become increasingly onerous.
These recruits are going through prep camp because they failed when measured against the Army's height-to-weight chart, a standard that hasn't changed in 30 years.
The kinds of jobs that the military increasingly needs talent for may require different standards, and that doesn't mean lowering standards, it just means different.
Defense Secretary Austin says today's all-volunteer force is the strongest military in human history. To keep it that way, he will have to welcome about 190,000 recruits into the military each year.
Continuing on the topic of safety, a public health threat known as forever chemicals can be found in 45% of tap water. Mark Strassman gets an inside look at new technology that could wash these contaminants out of existence.
Nasty cargo, 10,000 gallons of landfill water laced with PFAS, a known carcinogen that nothing could get rid of until now.
We are concentrating the nasty stuff to allow the annihilator system to treat it.
Not just treat PFAS, blast them out of existence. These so-called forever chemicals are man-made, used in Teflon, firefighting foam, even facial makeup, and previously indestructible.
This is where the PFAS go away.
Destroyed. That's correct.
We showed you Battelle, a nonprofit research institute doing a small-scale field test, distilling water into PFAS concentrate, the really nasty stuff, for destruction. It worked, a technological first, leaving behind water and salts harmless to the environment.
You've got to have enough force and energy to break those bonds.
Now another first, scaling that technology, like this forklift carrying the concentrate for treatment.
The PFAS annihilator lives inside this converted cargo container. With heat and pressure, it blasts the PFAS concentrate. These forever chemicals gone without a trace within seconds.
Here in Grand Rapids, this retooled water treatment plant is North America's first permitted PFAS remediation facility.
Were you convinced it would work?
We had a lot of hope that it would.
So how scalable is it?
It's could be much more scalable, much larger than this.
This plant's treating 500,000 gallons a week.
The market seems virtually limitless.
This is only the tip of the iceberg of us being able to get this scalable technology to market and to customers.
For the first time, nothing about PFAS is forever.
Coming up, Danger in the sky, how wildlife collisions are a major problem in aviation. This is Eye on America. Welcome back. Flying wildlife have long been a danger to planes and passengers. Bird strikes cost the airline industry more than $1 billion annually. Skylar Henry takes to the skies to see what's being done to keep both birds and planes safe.
South Jersey traffic, Cessna 105 on roll 26 South Jersey.
When she's not flying 737s for a commercial airline, you can spot First Officer Joanna Marmon up here, training aspiring pilots in a two-seater Cessna.
It's still safer to fly than to drive.
Part of the in-flight classroom training at her and her husband's flight school, Beyond Aviation, keeping your head on a swivel for weather, other aircraft, and birds.
So we're at 3,000 feet.
Experts say 3,000 feet in the air is where a majority of wildlife strikes happen. And in recent years, according to the FAA, the number of strikes is back up above pre-pandemic levels with more than 17,000.
I had one bird strike in my professional career. It was surprising. I happened to just glance down at the second that it was coming towards the airplane. As I looked up, I saw a blur and I heard a loud bang. Wow. The airplane itself didn't care. It was really a moot point.
The reality is most bird strikes are anticlimactic, but on occasion they can be unsettling, even for military aircraft. The FAA says the strikes shouldn't be ignored, adding it's important for all pilots to report them. While the strikes mostly happen mid-air, many of the precautions are taken on the ground.
This is the GA, or General Aviation runway right here.
USDA biologist Casey Kerr works the grounds at BWI Airport. He took us on the tarmac to look out for different types of wildlife, especially birds of prey.
What are we looking at here?
So this is a Swedish goshawk raptor trap. We've caught nearly 100, 120 in a year, and they're banded and relocated. We try to take them, give or take 50 miles from the airport.
Although not the most common, vultures, geese, and hawks pose the highest risk to aircraft in this area. Kerr is a team of one, managing about 3,500 acres in and around the airport, and is eagle-eyed about potential dangers.
We have 12 cannons on the airfield itself, and we primarily try to cover the approach and the departure ends of the runways.
Known as the hot spots. But chances are you wouldn't notice these sound cannons when you're on board a flight. Dozens of airports have them. The remote-controlled loud booms usually shoo flocks away.
If a pilot were to strike a bird on rotation or after they've committed to being in the air, that's the worst-case scenario.
While the techniques to keep birds at bay continue to evolve, the issue of bird versus plane has been around for more than 120 years.
You know, the Wright brothers struck the first and documented the first wildlife strike, red-winged blackbird, which was here on the airfield today when we drove around. We're kind of battling nature in a sense with this.
How important is it that pilots are vigilant themselves when recording strikes?
Oh, it's extremely important. We generally become aware of strikes by one of two ways. Either USDA or airport operations finds a strike that may have occurred, or more often than not, the pilots report the strikes. If we can identify that here on the field, we will. If we have any doubts at all, we will send those remains to the Smithsonian.
How excited are you when there's a new package in the mail?
Oh, it's like Christmas every day.
Carla Dove, a pure coincidence of a last name, is the program director of the Feather Identification Lab at the Smithsonian's National Museum of Natural History in Washington, D.C. Samples ranging from feathers to tissue and even whole birds are sent in. On average, 40 cases a day are processed here.
Once we know the species, we know how much it weighs on average, we know what it eats, we know what it's doing in a certain area, and that information is very valuable to the airport biologists that are on the airports and to the engineers who are designing the aircraft.
And why is that?
If you know how much a bird weighs and you know which birds are causing the damage, then you can design your engines or your aircraft parts to withstand a certain bird weight at a certain speed.
The collection of specimens within the Feather Identification Lab is more than 150 years old.
This is one of the largest bird collections in the world. In this room, we have about 500,000 specimens of birds.
But there are more than just birds throughout these rows for reference. The lab has other animals here too.
We have a lot of bats in our wildlife strikes. And last year, we had almost 700 events that had bats.
Laid out in front of me are some of the birds most frequently struck in the D.C. and Baltimore areas, including red-tailed hawks.
We had one of these in a bird strike just the other day.
And orioles.
I find it so interesting that even these small birds here can be involved in a strike like that, and you all are keeping it on record.
Data is so powerful, and the more data you have, the better your information is going to be.
Data that's key to the national coordinator for the Airport Wildlife Hazards Program, Mike Beeger.
It's one of the biggest databases in the world. It's in some circles, it's considered the gold standard.
Beeger's office oversees the National Wildlife Strike Database. To date, more than 280,000 strikes have been recorded. And he says the communication among the airports and pilots, wildlife management teams, and the Feather Identification Lab is critical. He'd know. Beeger helped with the NTSB investigation into the Miracle on the Hudson.
Did data collection and reporting change after the Miracle on the Hudson?
Strike reporting has increased remarkably since then.
What's behind the uptick in the numbers altogether?
Following the Miracle on the Hudson event, there was a great awareness of wildlife strike issues at airports and to airplanes, and then the conservation success in the United States. So as we fly more, we're encountering more of these birds in the air.
Despite the rise in reports, the number of damaging strikes has come down ever since wildlife biologists joined the airports. But even they are exploring ways to get strikes down altogether. But for now, pilots are going to have to continue to rely on their Hawkeye training to keep the battle for airspace at bay.
Would you like to fly?
Sure.
Okay. That is what straight level looks like.
Nice.
And that's it. You're
Nice.
You're flying.
Ahead, how one community is helping people with drug addiction seek treatment and break the cycle of overdoses. That story is next. We close our show with a dose of hope. The nation's opioid epidemic has claimed hundreds of thousands of lives, but one new treatment method could help make a difference. CBS News medical contributor Dr. Celine Gounder travels to New Jersey to see how more people could overcome addiction.
Throughout the city of Camden, the battle against the opioid overdose crisis is a daily fight. For those who live here,
How high up?
and for the first responders.
It's better than it used to be. It's still in the thick of it, I would say.
Paramedic Laith Shubar has worked in Camden for the past 3 years. Paramedic Corey DePatry for 2.
It's a lot of poverty. There's a lot of mental illness that goes on here, especially untreated mental illness in this population here, and a lot of drug addiction in the city of Camden.
The pair work for Cooper University Healthcare, one of the major healthcare systems serving the area. On average, they respond to 3 overdose calls per 12-hour shift. EMS Director Rick Rohrbach.
They would come in at 7 in the morning. They would go out, they would reverse an opioid overdose, and by the end of their shift, they were going out and reversing the same patient with another opioid overdose.
Within the same shift?
Within the same shift.
A level of demand that EMS Medical Director Dr. Gerald Carroll also had to navigate in the emergency room.
How have you seen drug use, drug overdose change over the last decade or so in Camden?
All of a sudden, half the patient board in the emergency department would be overdose or unconscious or drug-related problem, which had never been like that.
Over the past decade, overdose deaths more than doubled, now hitting 110,000 deaths per year. 75% of all drug overdose deaths involve opioids.
When the data started coming out that every overdose we see has a 1 in 10 chance of dying in the next year, that kind of put that all in perspective for us.
That's when Dr. Carroll and his colleagues in Camden started their study with the medication buprenorphine. Bup for short is taken orally to treat opioid withdrawal and stabilize patients. The study found that by equipping ambulances with this medication and training paramedics to start patients on it after reviving them, they could get almost 6 times as many people into drug treatment within the following month. But these conversations can be difficult for first responders, so they follow a mental script.
Here's the way we kind of script it and how we think about it, right? So a patient overdoses, they stop breathing. Everyone runs around. Finally, 911 shows up. Maybe some Narcan has been given, hopefully, because that's getting better. Maybe it hasn't. We ventilate the patient with a bag valve mask, and the patient breathes, and then they start to wake up.
You all right?
Yeah.
And that used to be where we finished. And this is where it's game on.
Ralph, hey buddy. You all right?
They're going to be disoriented. They're definitely not going to feel good. And pretty quickly as they wake up, they're going to wonder where they are, realize where they are, and then wonder what's happened to them why they were not aware.
Have a seat, bud. There you go, we got you, Ralph. We got you. There you go.
You be interested in taking the subs right now? Yeah. Get you feeling better?
And I think that conversation, that piece, the idea that our paramedics tag off if one's not connecting, and then administering the medicine, and all of that happens in less than 10 minutes.
2 tabs under your tongue, all right? We're gonna hang out with you, make sure you feel better. If you need more, we'll give you more.
Here, open up. Lift your tongue up. They go right underneath your tongue.
And I think that kind of scripting really makes this program work. And I think when paramedics and EMTs think about that, I think they can see how they could do it too. It's not a solution to the opioid crisis, so I don't want to overstate anything. But when patients take it, and I would say I think our uptake is somewhere around 1 in 10, 1 in 12. But of those, about 30 to 40% make their first and second appointments and are in treatment at about 30 days.
That comprehensive treatment is led by Dr. Caitlin Baston, the head of Cooper University's Center for Healing.
What do you do the first time you meet with them in the clinic?
We basically ask what their needs are that day. Food, clothes, shelter, community and engagement and love, which is a basic need, and medication. If you don't have your basic needs met, it's really hard to engage well in therapy or work on your trauma.
Services to help with mental health, housing, employment, and other basic needs are also offered here. An all-encompassing, revamped approach to treating addiction.
We saw paramedics and EMTs and frontline workers, police officers, nurses, folks in the hospital, overdose reversing people, giving them emergency naloxone over and over and over again. And they felt like the patients were failing. But we never gave those patients treatment. We just reversed them. It'd be like if someone had a heart attack and we immediately stabilized them, but then gave them no medicines to prevent the next heart attack. And they were like, weird, they had a heart attack again.
In 2019, the New Jersey Department of Health approved a $250,000 grant to fund paramedics to carry and offer Bup on emergency calls.
What kind of pushback did each of you get?
It's very easy to give Narcan and wake someone up. It's another thing to actually talk to someone and try and reach them where they are. That's a different skill set.
They were like, this is not going to work, this is hopeless. And what I think really turned the tide for a lot of them is we had them spend some time in the addiction clinic. You start to see them really as the person that they are. It's complicated how they got to where they are.
It's that understanding that it's a complicated problem, and there's a lot more that paramedics can be doing in the field. It's making a difference. One emergency call at a time.
What are you seeing with overdose rates?
In Camden County, we actually saw overdose rates stay stable or go down a little bit, while overdose rates were still skyrocketing in every other county in New Jersey.
But it's not a quick fix.
People think if you just get through the withdrawal, you've now treated the illness. But we know there are brain changes that are chronic that happened, and it's not just getting through withdrawal that treats it. You have to actually be on a stabilizing medicine and then have long-term recovery for your brain to heal. And the brain can heal, but you need time.
What would you say to people who would say, these are just more drugs that you're giving people, it's another addiction?
It's a difference between addiction and a medication or a treatment, right? Addiction is an out-of-control use. And when my patients say, aren't I just trading one drug for another? I'm like, yes, you're trading one very dangerous illegal drug that you can overdose on that causes all these terrible things to happen to your brain for a safe prescribed medicine that you can get from the doctor at a pharmacy, and you're gonna live a normal life. I would make that trade any day.
For more stories like these and live coverage of breaking news 24/7, stream us right here on CBS News. I'm Michelle Miller. Thank you for watching Eye on America.